Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift. Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today we are going to, we're going to be doing our first music episode for the year. We are going to be talking about death metal. I'm quite calm for somebody so ecstatic about talking about something so heavy and brutal. We are not just talking about any death metal band. We're talking about one of the more interesting ones. We are talking about Deicide, which is, according to this, they were the number 2 best-selling bands of the SoundScan era, of the death metal albums of the SoundScan era.
It actually surprised,
the album Legion.
surprised me.
What is the SoundScan era?
The SoundScan era is it's I believe every album after I forget if it was 1990 or 1991. It was Nielsen SoundScan, which was a more accurate way to track album sales, because previously they would go off of like how many albums were shipped. So like it doesn't necessarily mean
that's
those
not
albums
accurate.
were sold. Right. So Nielsen SoundScan, March 1st, 1991 is actually when it started tracking. And they actually would track actual album sales. So it's like a more accurate way of counting. So actually, the Black Album is the number 1 selling album of the Nielsen SoundScan era.
Yeah, that makes sense. The top selling death metal band, for those curious, of that era is Cannibal Corpse.
That actually surprised me. I would figure if Death would have been in the top 2.
No, I didn't think so. That makes sense.
I would think so.
I thought Death, for some reason, like Death is like, they're huge, but I feel like they're also one of those bands where like you gotta know to mention them. I don't know why they have like that aura where it's just like,
I guess, but
I don't understand it and I can't explain it, but it doesn't really make sense. That's why it's candy. But yeah, if you know what we are and what we do, Why Does This Exist? We're a podcast that talks about weird stuff in pop culture, music, movies, all that other jazz and everything. That's what we talk about. And, you could give us money or all the other things just by clicking the links below and, this, that, and the other thing. That's the news. Here's the weather. You are now about to witness the true strength of street knowledge from a ragtag group of rogues. So let's get on with the goddamn show. If we want to just like start talking about Deicide and death metal, really.
I think, you should probably lead the conversation on this since you're more acquainted with Deicide. I was never like the biggest fan of Deicide. They were always okay. I listened to them like every once in a while, but I was actually more interested in I always found it funny, and we could talk about this a little bit more in depth later. But Glenn Benton versus
Oh, Bob
um,
Larson?
Bob
Yeah,
Larson. Yeah, that was always
that's
the
my
fucking
favorite thing.
yes. But we'll talk about that more in depth. But why don't you start us off with just Deicide?
Oh, sure. When I first started getting into death metal as a wee lad, in high school, like I was like maybe like 14 or something, and like I just kept, as you keep getting into the heavier stuff, um, I of course was drawn to the darker stuff. So like Slayer was like my favorite band until I met some of the members and was like, oh, they're dicks. Um, so, but one of my, but like my my go-to number two at the time was pretty much always going to be Deicide, because the heavier that I got, the more into evil stuff that I got, and my dad hated that, which meant I loved it more. So the second that I found Deicide, I would start taunting my dad with it, and really just anybody. I like even in school, like because like some of the because like a lot of the kids thought that I was just a freak because I wore a t-shirt with like something scary on it,
Mm-hmm.
or they knew that I listened to metal. They of course would be like idiots. So they would, you know, so
Yeah,
they
so
so they'd be like, "Oh my god, you're like are you into this? Do you do that?" So I kind of
yeah,
just lean into it, and I'd start writing like Deicide lyrics on 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 the desks, and I'd start like I'd put them on and I'd move the desk after class so that it would be in a different place the next day and somebody else would see it, or like
yeah.
I'd draw like inverted crosses and stuff all over the place, and then I'd
Well,
move the desk, and then the next day I'd move it somewhere else, so like people would like start freaking out and thinking that the desks were like haunted and shit, and then there'd be more desks with like things on it, so like people really started to get spooked out. Like
yeah,
it was just fun stuff to do, and also just listening to Deicide constantly. It really influenced a lot of my playing. But the stuff that I loved about Deicide the most, that I found the most interesting, is not even because Glenn Benton is just an interesting human being, but like the stuff that I loved about the music was it was so different from every other death metal band that I listened to,
yeah.
because Deicide's music, and I don't know if this is like by design, but the melodies are all like the melody and the chord progressions are all in major keys, and then you have Glenn Benton like screaming about Satan on over it,
Yeah.
that creates this very weird, like it creates like a very weird I want to say duality, but I don't know if that's like the right word.
Juxtaposition.
Yes, that's the word. It creates
Hmm.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're a gentleman and a scholar.
Thank you.
Um so like it creates this juxtaposition where it's like it's this, and you're listening to it and you're like, this isn't supposed to be this catchy or pleasing,
Yeah.
but that's kind of what works.
Yeah.
Like the first time I heard Serpents of the Light, I was just like, which is my favorite Deicide song, by the way. I was just like, oh my god, like this isn't supposed to be happy sounding, but so yeah, I loved Deicide, and I loved the whole like Florida death metal scene, which was just weird. Like I read an interview where like were like somebody was talking about it, or maybe I read it in a book or something, and it was just like about the old death metal scene, and how like very just like how odd it was, because back then like they weren't playing in like real clubs or anything
Yeah.
because it was just too taboo.
Yeah.
So they were just like renting out VFW halls and stuff like that. And like Deicide had this stint where they would like, well, when they were Amen, the original, to go back to the beginning, the original name of the band was Carnage, and then it changed to Amen,
Hmm.
before they ended up getting signed with Roadrunner and changing the name. Um, which is because of the King Diamond album Them, which has the house is called Amon. So the record label thought that there might be an issue there, so they just asked them to change it, and they came up with Deicide because I believe it was one of the other songs on their EP or album that they were working on,
Yeah.
and and but like the scene in general was weird. Like Eamon would they'd throw a they had like a mannequin or like something like that stuffed with like rotting meat and everything, and Morbid Angel had these like pit bulls
Oh my god.
that they would bring to shows. So like in a so like it's so like they'd throw the thing that they throw the mannequin, and then the dogs would just start eating the meat, right, and just going after the mannequin, and this is all while like while they're playing and there's like death metal going on. It was probably really cool, but really like weird looking if you're like somebody who doesn't know what the hell is going on, like a
Yeah.
passerby. Um, like definitely an interesting time. And then you had Death just being good at everything,
Yeah.
and
Death
all
is
the other
fucking. I mean,
bands just
Death
coming
was
in
like
and
in
doing their
a league
thing.
of its own. I feel like in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Death is,
Um.
I mean, by far my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of death metal, but Death is like by far my favorite band in the genre.
Yeah.
Um,
And then you have all other kinds of like crazy death metal bands just going
it's
around.
interesting that so many of them came from Tampa.
Yes.
I
And
don't understand. Like,
Obituary is like teenagers. They're like
yeah,
babies. So it must have been an interesting time.
it's just like what was going on in Tampa at the time that like all these death metal bands came out. It's like weird.
It's got to
I,
be something in the swamp.
maybe. I
The
mean, there's
swamp, it's just the swamp water.
you could look back at like I think there are some geographical influences on certain genres. Like, it makes sense that black metal came from Scandinavia because it's cold, it's dark, it's depressing. Norway has like one of the highest suicide rates in the world because it's like constantly dark. They don't get any vitamin D. Uh, so it makes sense for like black metal to come from there. Thrash metal coming from California makes sense because, in LA there was like there's always like the clash of punk and metal bands. So like, you know, eventually it was just gonna turn out that there was gonna be like punk influenced metal, you know?
It's also a fast-paced area, like, just California in general,
Yeah,
like, it gets, like, a laid back, it gets, like, a laid back reputation,
yeah,
but LA is still, like, very fast-paced, so, like,
yeah,
that also makes sense with the speed and everything. It's
yeah,
weird how culture influences the music in the area.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, like New York City with the hardcore scene, like New York
yeah, it's,
hardcore was
like, grittier
yeah.
sounding music,
The
groovier.
urban the urban like area and like the urban decay I think really influences like the hardcore punk,
Yeah,
mentality. Same thing in like LA with the gutter punks and stuff like that, like, just like the living off like the fringes of society and that's very like punk rock. Um
yeah.
and it's just weird like what happened in Tampa that death metal like was fomented there. Like it doesn't like, it's like what was going on in Tampa?
I think it's just the whole Florida man vibe.
I mean, it could be the Florida man, also maybe the Deep South being like the Bible Belt, and like the just like the
That's
rebellion against that
that
because
is probably the biggest factor.
yeah,
It probably has a lot to do with that because just about every death metal band is like
very
just
satanic.
yeah, just
Yeah,
like anti-Christian and mostly. Like they're all like
Deicide
kind of
definitely.
anti-God but more anti-Christian than everything. So
Yeah,
it would
bands like
that would make sense.
Death I feel was like a little bit more nuanced, and it was more anti-organized religion. I think the lyrics of Death, he had like spiritual healing, which was like very critical of like the televangelists and shit like that, and all these fake preachers that were like, give us money and you'll get into heaven, or so we could buy a jet, like
Yeah.
all this shit like that. Whereas like Deicide was like blatantly like almost black metal levels of anti-Christian,
Yeah.
like saying like
That has to do really more with like Glenn Benton coming in to the band, and
yeah,
he because he was raised in like a more like Catholic household where
yep,
he had like aunts that were like very religious. His like mother,
hmm,
his father was like a Roman Catholic, like his like they were like strict Catholics. His mom was a Sunday school teacher. They like they and like they like put him in Catholic schools and he got kicked out of just about all of them.
Yeah.
So like, and I believe he had an aunt who was like into the occult just a little bit or showed him the occult, and that's kind of where like that started. But like he just it was just constantly getting kicked out of every church, everything, and he just like being like constantly surrounded with the church. Like he had grown up in like Niagara Falls, and then he like then like they moved to Florida, and then like he's just kind of like eventually like going back to Florida to New York. I think now he
Yeah.
might still live there, or he still lives in Florida. I'm not really sure. From like the interviews that I've like heard, like it wasn't entirely clear of like where exactly he is now. But anyway, he's like just constantly surrounded by all of this like Catholicism, and he's
Hmm.
so he's just the lyrics all come from him rebelling against it completely to the point where like he's doing like, but also he's like a smart businessman because it's the 90s in the age of like shock getting
Yeah,
on
that's true.
TV and everything.
Yeah,
So
you had the
he's
Attitude Era and
yeah, so he
in
starts
wrestling.
making so he starts doing all of these like, you know, crazy interviews or he's just spouting off all of this like ridiculous like anti-Christian stuff. So of course it's like getting attention to the point where like he's like branding an inverted cross into his forehead.
Yeah.
Um
He's also claimed to actually be a theistic Satanist,
yeah,
which for those who don't know, like so the Church of Satan is often in the news, especially recently, because they are often like trying to put like satanic displays in like courthouses in order to protest like all these Christian or like all these government buildings, especially in the South, that are putting like Christian symbolism in like government buildings, which technically should not be allowed because of separation of church and state. So basically like the Church of Satan, the Church of Satan is trying to like do the same thing just to like prove a point. It's like, oh, you wouldn't like our iconography in your courthouse, so why are you putting like Christian iconography, right? But what people don't realize is that the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple, as it is, that you see in the news, they're really not Satanists. They're like basically atheists cosplaying as Satanists.
yeah,
They don't believe in Satan. They don't believe in anything. They're just like they use Satan as a way to prove a point, basically. Uh, there, on the other hand, there are theistic Satanists, which Benton like purported to be, and they are the ones that actually worship actual Satan. They believe in Satan as a real thing, and often like these are the people that you hear making sacrifices and like sacrificing chickens in like the woods and shit like that, and like doing all kinds of crazy shit like that. So Glenn Benton claims to be a theistic Satanist. Uh, a lot of what he says, he's actually even said like a lot of it is tongue in cheek, and he says it just to get a reaction out of people.
yeah,
Um,
that's kind of how he's always been. He's a personality, and like you don't really see a whole lot of that anymore
right.
from like a lot of like newer bands and stuff. Like there's like you don't see a whole lot of like characters. You either see like these like made up like just like corporate pop whatever or corporate like anything just like plucked out of nowhere and created, and there's not really a real character anymore. Like that's kind of a lost thing, is like just the characters in music.
Yeah.
um very very few, but like he's one of the last guys left who's like still doing it. He's still like just but he's also just kind of like he has this attitude of like, don't take anything I say seriously.
Yeah.
I'm like he's one of those people who like if it's best for business, like he'll do it, which is also why like he started like he would do more shocking things like saying that he would kill himself at age 33 to mock Jesus Christ's death, where
Yeah.
like then he turned 33 or 34 and he didn't do it, and like people were like calling him a hypocrite, and he's like, you're an idiot if you believe that I was going to do that just because.
Yeah.
Like he's like, only I think his exact quote was like only cowards and losers do that, like
Yeah.
commit suicide,
Yeah.
which I believe to an extent. I don't think like I know you're going through whatever you're going through, but like it, like, you got to just hold out and just see whatever the hell's going to happen.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like just there's no point. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So you might as well just like stick with it and just like you know just roll with the punches of life because it's not going to stop. Um, you just got to be able to like duck and weave a little bit better. So just
Yeah.
like work on that. What I'm telling you to do is to just like find Apollo Creed's like coach and like work with him. Um, so yeah, so Glenn Benton he's doing all this stuff. He's learning how to play music and everything. He was originally a guitar guy, but there was a bass shortage, a bass player shortage in the area. So he was like, okay, I'll just play bass. And then Eamon forms, and he was always impressed with Steve Asim, um, and the Hoffman brothers. Like, well, this is from like Glenn's point of view. So like the Hoffman brothers will have a different story. There's a lot of
Mhm.
controversy there, and we'll get to that. Um, but they were playing with Steve, and like Steve was the one that like impressed Glenn Benton, and he was like, okay, like these guys are whatever like these guys are whatever. We can do the band with them, but I can be in a band. It was like one of those I can be in a band with them, but I need to be in a band with Steve kind of a thing.
Mhm.
So like the two of them hit it off, they did their thing and they recorded like their demo within, the first month or so. They were playing shows and everything and then they like and they're playing shows, they record the second demo and everything and then they get the and then they get to Roadrunner, which, you know, the alleged story is like he ran into the salacious story is Glenn Benton runs into Roadrunner's office and like throws the demo at him and just yells at them, and then they gave them contracts. That's not actually true. Like Glenn Benton has
Course,
said
that's
this.
for those who don't know, that's not how you get a fucking
No,
record
no, it's
deal. That would
not.
never work. You would get thrown out for solicitation.
If
Uh,
you even made it that far to go into the office of the
yeah,
main guy,
if you
so
actually watch, there's a movie called Airheads where the main character tries to do this several times. He tries to disguise himself as a delivery boy. He to try to get his record into the office of the record company, and he fails every time because again, that's not how you get a record deal. So
no, not at all. Um, the way you do the real way to do that is you intern. And I wish I did this when I was interning for Earache, but I think because we didn't have like the album. If we had the album, I probably would have tried this,
yeah.
but we just had like our shitty demo.
Oh yeah.
What you need to do is intern for a record label, take your and like wait until they give you like in order to like hand deliver something to an office, you go to the office and you slip your demo or your business card in with all the other stuff, and then like you just leave it there, and then you at least know that they have it. I mean, that doesn't guarantee anything,
Hmm.
but you at least know that you put it, you got it, you brought it to the dance, but you don't know if anybody is going to take them home tonight. Um, So anyway, they get signed. They do the thing. They change the name. Apparently, like according to Glenn Benton, this is where the issues begin with the Hoffman brothers. That they like got into like King Diamond's face about it at one point, like early on, about like the name change, where like Glenn Benton like didn't have anything to do with it, and he just kind of like heard about this. But we'll get to the controversies later. Um, but according to Glenn, there was like always some kind of like an issue with the two of them.
Hmm.
But again, this is one guy's side of the story. So I I'm sure like the truth is somewhere in the middle. Um, but yeah, they do the first album and it's a pretty big friggin' hit. It's making a big deal. A lot of people are enjoying it. But the interesting thing here that a lot of bands do not do, um, they did not tour right away, even though the record label was telling them to tour for the first album. Glenn, being the businessman, told them to wait for bigger offers because the clubs that were trying to play them or for like the tour dates or whatever, they were just getting like, you know, it's a new band, so we're gonna pay them new band rates. So they were like, it was lower money offers, and like, so he was just so like Glenn Benton's just we're not gonna tour for the first album. I don't care what you say. We're not touring for the first album. We're gonna tour for the second album when like there's bigger offers because they'll wait and then they'll be more established with the second record. They'll have a bigger catalog, etc. So when Legion comes out, then they start doing the tours and they start doing everything, which I think is really cool and also like a really interesting philosophy, especially for that time, because this was like the early 90s, right?
Yeah.
So I think Legion was 92. And so like that was the opposite of just about every band. And also like everybody, you're a young kid. So you want to be like, you have this whole like idea of fame and everything. So you're waiting. So like rather wait, you're just going to take any offer. Where like waiting it out is probably the smarter thing to do. Probably, well, especially now. Nowadays, I would say just wait it out until you get like a good, like a really like juicy tour package.
Yeah.
If you can. Like I would say, because like we've talked about this before, but bands really don't make any money anymore.
No. It's not in this
Even
day and
like
age.
even like bigger, well-established bands, like they're still like they're still not making it like close to what they used to. I mean,
No.
even like it's crazy, and even like the record industry in general, it's kind of like on its last legs.
Yeah.
There's like there's gonna be a ton of consolidation. I mean, there already is, but like there's gonna be even more consolidation and like closings and like all of these, like a lot of historic record labels. They're gonna go away.
Well, the need for record labels has really diminished in recent years because
That too.
the democratization of music, basically, whereas anybody can record an album in their bedroom now. Case in point, we did. And it's anybody could do it. It's like you basically like, I mean, yeah, you need a little bit of training just to know how to use the programs and stuff, but like you could get all the training you need. You could basically get online and do it yourself in your bedroom, and then release a record.
Yeah, like
for a fraction of the cost of what it takes to record in a big studio.
right, like you could figure it out really simple, and
Especially with you have all these like amps now that have like uh uh what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Like digital amp modeling.
modeling.
Yes. So you could literally get any sound you want. You buy like, it's like a $600 like Sans amp or something like that. You can get any sound you want out of your amp, plug it directly into your computer, or into your uh your converter, and like literally have any sound you want right into your recording program, into your DAW. And
Right.
you don't even have to worry about having like $1 million setup of like all different amps and speaker cabinets and all that. It's like it's all, you don't need it anymore.
You don't even have to worry about like you don't even have to
Miking and all
worry.
that.
No.
Even
Or like
in,
noise complaints. Like I've like I'm recording like
yeah.
I've been recording what's going to be, I guess you could say, our second album / comeback album. Um like I've been recording that, and like there's just like some little like things here and there that I'll just record because they'll come to me. Um for like other projects or things that I'll just never do anything with some of these things, but
Yeah.
they make me feel cool to just
Even
like put them together. But like I'm in I'm in like a one bedroom apartment. I there's no like I'm not I should be I'm not worried about any noise complaints because I'm not plugging into an amp or miking it up. Nobody even knows. Like the lady next door, she has no idea that I'm doing this.
you could
Nobody
basically
like
you
I
could
can do it all.
you could
I can do it
basically
all in here.
simulate everything that you would get in a studio also, like with the amp modeling program, especially like in Logic. The amps that the amp modeling in Logic, you could like change microphone position, and it like will actually like manipulate the sound based on like where you're placing a virtual microphone,
Yeah,
and you can
crazy.
add room noise and like and again, this is all plug and play directly into your computer. You're not even actually making any noise except for like the string noise. So if you're sitting there with headphones, you could sit there silently in your closet and record it like a friggin' metal album and no one would even know, like you said.
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come. Now,
Yeah.
I do of course prefer just a live studio sound and just like, having everything like just all hanging out with like everything plugged in the
Yeah.
way that it should and mic'd up the way that it should be. But I mean, if you don't have the space,
But
then
you know what?
you can do it
Again,
now.
even that, you could rig that up in your living room or in your garage and still do it, just as good as you would hear it. Maybe not exactly as good as you would hear it in like a multi-million-dollar studio, but you know what? If you're doing it in your garage and you use gobos and you know like all kinds of sound dampening and treatment and do it right and mic it right, people would not be able to tell it. The average listener could definitely not tell a difference. Someone with a trained
No,
ear might actually tell a difference, but the average listener is not going to know the difference.
yeah, I agree. But yeah, I mean, anyway, like, but just back to Deicide, like, that's the thing that really, there. It's just that's one of the many interesting things about this, and I think like it really speaks to like Glenn Benton and Steve Asim as like how they are as like as businessmen,
Hmm.
you know, and it speaks for itself because Deicide's been around like longer than you and I have,
Yeah.
like just as a band. So it's just really really interesting stuff. Um, I I mean, what was the thing that I mean, and then like, just to get back into the history, then like in 2004, the Hoffman brothers leave. There's like a whole spat about like what there's like a whole spat about what's going on, um, because it's pretty much like a day one from the record labels once they like because like the thing is the other thing is and we've talked about this too about like a record label contract is pretty predatory, especially
Yeah.
when you're a kid who like
Yes.
you're like very young getting signed to this label. You just want to be famous and you want to make all your money and everything, but you don't know that like everything that you do is owned by the label and everything that you
Yeah.
buy is owned by the label. So like you're like the idea is like you're permanently indebted to the label
Basically.
and they're like making like millions off of you while you're making pennies
Yep.
on the dollar for your music, but you don't own that either. And
Hmm.
all of this crazy stuff where like you gotta if you're not paying attention, which they are hoping that you don't, kind of like how it's kind of like how the reason why you get really great military benefits if you're in like the Army, Marines, Navy, etc. The only reason why the benefits are that good is because the military is banking that you're going to die
Yeah.
in combat so that they don't have to give you those benefits. Like
Yeah.
it's not because the government loves you and wants to thank you for your service. That's the bullshit they feed you. But they sweeten the pot because they're assuming because statistically you're not going to get it because you're gonna die. Um, they're like where like similar to a label, they're giving you all these like sweet ideas of like fame and money and women and whatever it is and the road and like not having to have a real job, summer vacation forever, and all that stuff. Like the bullshit that they're selling you is that, but they're not telling you is that you know we own everything that you do from this point forward
Yes.
until we decide that we don't want to deal with you anymore or you're not making us money and we just squeeze everything out of like a compilation album and we'll just own that forever too
Hmm.
whenever we want or we'll just make new t-shirts and like you don't own that because we own this design or we own this album so we could keep reprinting this album like and you're still barely going to make anything and all that other stuff um like so you don't know that and they also you also do not understand as a kid signing a record label contract and everything, you don't understand how like a writer's share credit works out. And this is like the biggest thing that like will kill a band is like when it comes down to money. Like a writer's credit, basically, you're going to get, if you have a writer's credit on the song, you're going to get more money. You're going to get more of the profits from the album.
Hmm.
And especially if you're like a ghostwriter or like a writer for like other musicians. Like I remember in Lemmy's book, White Line Fever, which is one of my favorite metal autobiographies and books of all time, which I should reread again. Um, he like talked about how he did how he was a ghost, how he like wrote a couple of Ozzy songs, and how like
Hmm.
the checks that he got for the Ozzy songs as a writer were like some of the biggest checks that he had ever seen at the time.
Yeah.
And he was just like, if I had known that, I would have just done this
Hmm.
for a living. And then I could have had like I could have just stayed home and like, you know, had a normal life.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why in pop music, oftentimes producers are putting their names down
yeah,
as a writing credit on songs because they're getting paid hand over foot for that shit.
yeah. So anyway, so that was kind of like, I mean, like I said, according to Glenn Benton, there were always issues with the Hoffman brothers, but like this is really where like it starts, and that's from like day one of like being on the label is when they get the checks, and everyone's excited to get the check until they realize that like this band that's supposed to be all for one and one for all, the guys who have the writers credits are like they're getting they're getting paid more money than them.
Hmm.
So this pisses them off, and this is like the start of like the whole rift in between everything, and like this continues on, I don't know how many albums this happens,
Yeah.
but like according to Glenn Benton, him and Steve were the ones writing they were writing all the lyrics and all of the music, because Glenn and Steve are also guitar guys. So
Hmm.
they would write all the riffs and everything, and like maybe the Hoffman brothers would write a riff here and there and like the solos, but like in terms of like writing the lyrics and everything, like it was just like Glenn and Steve, so their names were on the thing as writers, and the Hoffman brothers didn't really like that too much, and they would like argue. I guess there were like lots of arguments over how they should just put all four of them on there, because like so that way like they can all like get the same amount of money,
Yeah.
and Glenn and Steve were probably like, no, we're not like you shouldn't get paid for like the work that you don't do.
Right.
This is again, this is Glenn Benton's side of the story. The Hoffman brothers side of the story is quite different, where they're claiming that Glenn Benton just purposely like didn't write them, like or like he had like agreed that he would, and then he like went behind their back and just didn't tell them, like they just didn't put them on as like writers credits on the, like when they had to submit all the materials to the label. I don't, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and like the Hoffman brothers also allege that like he took like a big cut of like merch sales from like certain like albums and stuff like that. I again, I don't know. It could be just as easy as he negotiated a bigger check or something. I really don't know. But,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, the lesson learned is it's not you get what you deserve. It's you get what you negotiate.
Right.
That's really what it is. So sometimes you negotiate what you deserve and you do get that. But if you don't negotiate, you probably aren't going to get paid what you think that you're worth.
Right.
So let that be a lesson to all of you um out there. So yeah, so the Hoffman brothers finally split after like, after like many years of all of this, and they go on to reform AIM and they release one album, and that's kind of it. There's not really much else that happens. I thought that the album Liar in Wait was pretty good. It took forever to come out, but
Mhm.
I thought the album was pretty good. Um, I don't really have anything to I don't have anything else to say about it. Good album, but they haven't really done anything since. I don't really know what happened.
Yeah.
Um, but but Deicide continues. And this is where it gets really interesting is the post Hoffman Brothers stuff because the music starts to change.
Hmm.
Um, where the songs not only get longer, but they get more melodic.
Yeah.
And this has a lot to do with the Jack Owen, who was coming from Cannibal Corpse, and Ralph Santola,
Hmm.
who this part is also interesting because Santola is a Catholic. He was a Catholic, and some of the fans didn't really like that. But Santola played with like all these death metal bands mostly as a session guy. Like he played in Death. Um, I believe for the most part he was like a session guy or a touring guy,
Hmm.
but incredible guitar player, and like they end up doing Stench of Redemption, which is one of my favorite Deicide albums, if not my favorite Deicide album, because it's so different. And
Yeah.
it was such a it was like, well, Serpents of the Light might be, I don't know, it goes back and forth between Serpents of the Light and Stench of Redemption, but like ah, what the first time that I heard Stench of Redemption, it was so different from anything else that they had done at that point.
Hmm.
That, like, the change like and this is where it gets dicey for a lot of bands where, like, I'll just use the obvious example of Metallica where, like, before, like, the early era and then going into, like, the '90s
Yeah.
era, it's like it gets weird because it's like I think people were okay with the Black Album because you could see, like, a gradual transition in the songs
Yeah.
to, like, a lighter style,
Yeah. But
but
Load and Reload were very much like
yes.
a huge contrast.
Right. So, like, if, like, the second album was, like, a little bit lighter, but still, like, kind of heavy, and if
Yeah.
they had I feel like if they had, like
Megadeth did it a
and
little bit better with their transition because
yeah.
you had Cryptic Writings. Well, I had Rest in Peace first, which was like hailed as one of the greatest thrash metal albums of all time. Then you had Cryptic Writings, which was still pretty thrashy, but had some slower songs, but it's still very metal. And then Euthanasia came out. Euthanasia again, like still a couple of thrashier songs, but like you could kind of see the change. Or no, not Cryptic Writings. What did I, what came out first? Fuck. Uh,
No, I think it
uh
was Cryptic Writings, wasn't
no,
it?
no, before that. After Rest in Peace was
Oh, crap.
fucking
Symphony of no, is
no,
this the one
that
with
was the
Symphony
song.
of
The one with yeah.
Destruction?
Uh,
Um,
Countdown to Extinction.
Countdown to Six yes, there we go.
Yeah, so then Countdown to Extinction, and then Euthanasia, then Cryptic Writings. Cryptic Writings were kind of like started to like really veer into more like just like more rocky songs, not really like metal necessarily. And then of course Risk came out, and we already did an episode on Risk, so we all know what
Yeah, it's
happened there.
quite
Uh,
bad.
so
But
yeah,
at least there was like a slow turn where like you could kind
yes,
of get an idea of like where it was going.
yeah,
Where like Load and Reload from Black Album is just it changed too quickly and
yeah,
people were like pissed about it.
yeah,
And then it was even weirder when they went back to like when they tried to go back to like their roots with Saint Anger gets weirder. We've already talked about that.
yeah. We already
And
talked
then
about
like, and then you get to what the
Death
hell
Magnetic.
was yes, to Death Magnetic, and then that was okay, but like
Yeah,
I like eh, and I don't know, the latest one I really didn't care so much for
I
it.
think the latest one is their best album in like years.
I think no, I agree with you. I think it is their best album in years, but I still was just like about it.
Yeah, well, I mean
It
that's
didn't do
like
that much for me.
yeah.
Yeah, so like Stench of Redemption is ridiculous. And Deicide gets more melodic and everything, and then they start getting into and like I loved I really loved this era of Deicide because they get to then they get to Till Death to His Part, which is one of is like musically it's probably their best album from a musical standpoint. Like just in
Hmm.
terms of like the writing on this album, um, which which I mean, it's also it's bittersweet because that album is like about Glenn Benton's divorce
Right.
because he went through a very bitter divorce and custody battle where like they like tried to like his wife's lawyer tried to like tried to throw all of like his like shocky stuff and like all the things with the band into it so that she could like
Hmm.
get custody. And like the judge, at least the judge was cool and was just like, no, we're not like even gonna entertain this idea. Like he's obviously a personality. We're not gonna freaking bother with this.
Yeah.
Um, so like it got really, really ugly and he like wrote an album about it. I don't think that he's. I think I don't know. I don't know if they have since it's come out because it's been like roughly 20 years now,
Mm.
which is crazy. But I don't like. I believe at the time he said that he would never play anything from it because that album is just too painful.
Yeah.
And he kind of just did that more like that album was just like for him,
Hmm.
which I get. I don't know if they have since played anything from that. I saw them on tour. I only saw them one time in 2011 in Rochester,
Hmm.
and Dan Lilker was like, I bumped into him there too because he lives in Rochester.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, I mean, he was just smoking a joint, doing his thing, having a good time.
Yeah.
So I just said, I just like said hello, just had like very little, very brief small talk, and then like let him do his thing. I mean, I'd met him before at like a show, where like he was playing and like he did like a save the day interview because it was with Lockup, and I was supposed to interview Tom Limberg from At the Gates,
Hmm.
and because he's a singer, and um, I he had laryngitis that we like on that tour, and it was just really bad timing. Like he just caught laryngitis from the road
Oh,
or
yeah.
something. So he was just like he was like, I'm sorry, but I can't do an interview today. I can only he's like, I don't even know if I can how many songs I can do. So like
Yeah.
they had like the guys from like Goat Horror and the other bands just like, you know, they just had like printouts of like the various of like the songs from the set list that they could just give to like various band members and just
Yeah.
like and so that they could just say like we're still gonna play and I'm gonna do what I can do, but I might only be able to do 3 songs. So if you guys want to come in and just like jam on these, like
Yeah.
go for it. So Dan Lilker steps in and he's just like, "Oh, I could like I'll just do an interview with you if you want to just like change up your questions a little bit."
Oh,
And I would be
nice.
like, "Yeah." So like we're doing the interview and he's like, and I asked him how he got his like how he gets his crazy like bass sound because it's quite unique.
Yeah.
And he goes into his guitar he goes into his guitar bag and he pulls out like an old like a 30 something year old Boss
Nice.
DS1 pedal and he's
Nice.
like it's this and it was heavy too so like
Yeah.
it was like the OG thing.
Solid state.
Yeah, and I was like, "Holy shit." So like, he just like slapped the pedal in my hand. He's like, "It's this." He's like, "I only plug into this. I don't have to plug into a chorus or any of that other bullshit. I just plug into this fucking thing and then I just rip it." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." He also did say that he was down for an SOD reunion
Oh,
at the time. Yeah, I tried to get the interview into like Blabbermouth, but those assholes never like pick up anything good.
yeah.
So,
Well,
you know, no surprise there. Um,
assholes.
yeah, no, of course they'd rather like have like some salacious headline that's like a gotcha from like something somebody else said instead of like something legitimately cool. But anyway, so we get this era of Deicide, which is, you know, really really awesome, and then eventually like there were some issues there with like I mean, well, Deicide even like went on hiatus um during the during like Glenn Benton's divorce because he was like, no, if I'm in a custody battle like and it's like getting ugly like this, it is not a good idea for me to go on tour and like
Mm-hmm.
because then like they can use it and just be like, see, he's not even here, he's not home, he's in Australia or wherever.
Right.
See, like so like so like they didn't tour for a while just because he was just, you know, he like stayed grounded because he like wanted to like, you know, he wanted to like be able to see his kids,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which that's a good dude move.
Yeah.
It's basically so they finally do this thing and then they like they do their next album, which is To Hell with God, which that was the tour that I saw them for. They do a few other albums. They do In the Minds of Evil, which also good album. I really like that artwork. It like reminds me of like a really brutal like Magic the Gathering card like some like no like look at the artwork for that and just tell me that like you can't see that on like a mono black card.
Oh yeah.
Like that
Yeah,
would
like a mono black sorcery or instant.
yeah,
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah. Um so so they do that album, which I think In the Minds of Evil is a pretty underrated one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then people start leaving the band. They Jack Owen leaves the band. He joins 6 Feet Under. Then like for the for Overtures of Blood and like Ralph Santola. I think he like Ralph Santola. I think left well even during like the custody battle like Glenn Benton was like thinking about like just retiring from music and leaving Deicide too
Yeah.
just because there was just too many things going on
Yeah.
and like you know they just all this stuff happened. Ralph Santola left, he came back, and then unfortunately when they were writing Overtures of Blasphemy, Ralph Santola passed away after a heart attack that
Oh shit.
yeah. Well, he had a heart attack, and then he had a heart attack, which resulted in him being a coma. It was like a widowmaker, I guess. And then,
Oh
like,
yeah.
you know, then after like he was in a coma for like a week, and they just like they were just like, this is just let him go.
Yeah.
Um, and then they end up getting, you know, they end up getting other people in the band, and then we get to like the COVID era and everything, and now we have got and then we come to the most recent album, which is what the hell? I was listening to it yesterday.
Banished by sin.
That's the one.
Yeah.
We get to that one, which it's okay. It's I think like it's not a bad album, but I think it's like just okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, we also didn't get to like the most shocking of shocking things Glenn Batten would do, which was the Bob Larson
Yes.
prank
So
calls.
this is my favorite
You
thing.
could talk all about this.
Yeah. So, and you actually were the one that turned me on to this. Like years and years ago, we were talking. You were like, "Oh, you got to listen to the Bob Larson phone calls with Glenn Benton."
Well,
And
because I think when I showed it to you, you had like maybe I think you had like just been getting into DSI just like a little bit, probably because I told you to.
yeah,
um, but like, um, but I like it was around the time where like he shot the squirrel during
yeah,
the interview because like he shot a squirrel with a pellet gun while he was doing an interview with a magazine because like the squirrel was like
it was like chewing up his electric in his fucking attic or something.
yeah. So he finally saw the squirrel and he like lost his shit and he like went mad like Elmer Fudd and he just like shot the squirrel without like he did it without realizing like where he was.
Yeah,
Like he just kind of lost it and like just that like cathartic fit of like madness.
Yeah.
And he shoots the squirrel, and like, and I think that's where it started, where you were like, holy shit, this guy shot a squirrel during an interview, and I was like, oh, have you heard the Bob Larson shit? And like, there now you can continue.
Yeah. So Bob Larson, for those who don't know, is one of those televangelist like grifters, I like to call them, because he is filthy rich and has private jets and stuff like that, and claims to be like a man of God, so very much like a fake Christian, making millions off of
Your
people that are
typical
gullible.
televangelist mega church guy.
Yeah. And he was actually famous for like staging these exorcisms where he would bring people up on stage and exorcise them.
They're a big fan of that in
Exorcise
the
the
South.
demons. Yeah. So Bob Larson
Like,
had this radio show where
if you've seen the first Borat movie where he like gets baptized in the church, that's what it
yes.
is.
Yeah, and he starts like speaking in tongues, and the guy's like, like it's just
yeah.
So Bob Larson had this radio show where he would first of all, Bob Larson was also always very critical of rock music and heavy metal in general, and called it satanic and all this
Of
other
course.
bullshit.
Well, it was also the 90s where like that was like
It
the
was the
satanic panic era.
Yeah. So he had this radio show where he would, talk about like rock music and Satanism and all this other crap, and he would have people on the show, like he would bring Satanists on the show that would talk, and like he would try to convince them to like, become like convert to Christianity and all this stuff. And Glenn Benton used to call into his show all the time, and they would just have this banter back and forth. And it would just be hilarious because it was Glenn Benton being Glenn Benton, and like being very like over the top and tongue in cheek, and Bob Larson like freaking out, but it gets to the point where it's almost like a shtick. Like you can very clearly tell that both of them are in on this, and they made it into like almost like a skit or something.
Yeah.
Whenever Glenn Benton would call in.
Well, he would call in when he would call in when Deicide had like a tour announcement, and like they had a Denver date because that's where like the mega church was.
Yeah, and he would always say, "I'm coming to you, Bob." Like, and it was just like hilarious. And later on, Glenn Benton even went on to say that Bob Larson and me are actually kind of friends. he's like he does the same, like he knows what he's doing, like he's not like an idiot, he's not like he's pretending, and he knows this is like we're playing this up for the radio show and stuff.
Yeah,
and,
it's a gimmick.
Yeah, and like Glenn is like, yeah, I'm doing it because he's like, I'm promoting the tour basically and my concert,
and both Bob, making money,
and Bob's promoting his fucking grift. So it's like we're both like, it's like a mutually beneficial thing. So it really was like basically just like the two of them like riffing off of each other, and it is hilarious.
Because what would happen? Because like you got to think about it. Like what was happening immediately after, like. All of the crazy Christians who were listening to Bob Larson's show were terrified and angry, so they were going to the stores and buying the album so that they could burn them.
Yes.
Which was a stupid idea anyway, because you've like...
Deicide's now making tons of money because you're buying the album to burn it or break it or do whatever,
Yeah.
Like,
possession is 9/10 of the law. Once you paid me, I don't give a shit what you do with my product.
Exactly.
That's why it's yours. That's what you paid for. You do whatever you want with it. I don't care. I have your money.
I encourage anybody listening to like look it up. It is on YouTube. If you type in Glenn Benton Bob Larson on YouTube, and it is like the funniest shit ever. It's like literally like watching like a friggin' like Saturday Night Live skit or something, or like a wrestling promo.
This is something that should have been on like wrestling in the 90s.
It is pure gold. Like I will say that, right? Like the two of them together is like you can't get better comedy. They have like such good chemistry together, which is hilarious seeing like where they're both coming from.
It is quite unique. It's a sight to behold.
Yeah. Yeah, I love listening. Every once in a while, I'll go back and listen to it just for like a laugh. It's just it's funny, and Glenn is so over the top, and Bob Larson's almost like the straight man to Glenn Benton. It's hilarious. It really is like comedy. It is comedy gold. So go check it out. Bob Larson, Glenn Benton. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah. And even more so, we didn't talk about this for quite a while, but their most probably commercially successful album is Once Upon the Cross, which I like the whole point of that is like the cover. So the artwork on the cover, like it was like getting banned from like all of the stores that were originally supposed to carry it.
Mm-hmm.
And like because it's supposed to be just like Jesus and he's like disemboweled and everything like that, and it's like this scary thing or this like blasphemous thing. So like the minute that they got the artwork and the minute that like the label approved of the artwork and like we're like whatever, and then but when the stores got it, the stores were just like, oh no, we're not touching this. Like
Yeah.
we're not gonna order this. Like this is gonna be like this is a little too much for anybody who's gonna walk in. So like they were like, oh well, we got to change the cover, and he was like, why don't we just put a sheet over him, like like you would for like somebody who's like just doing an autopsy or something.
Mm.
And they were just like, okay. So they did that, and like the other shtick was that like because again, this is a time where like people actually bought records and
Yeah.
CDs. So like the shtick was like they put like the parental advisory label and everything, which as we've talked about only helped these bands.
Yes.
The thing that like once word of mouth got around when somebody bought the Deicide album, like all these like little like rumors start in the early days of the internet and just word of mouth, just like whatever the original cover was supposed to be, and also like in the liner notes there's a cheat code to make like Lara Croft naked in Tomb Raider 2, and all this other bullshit. And so and like when you like once you have like when you open up the album into the like the artwork and the liner notes and everything, it has the real cover uncensored underneath the the cover that's being sold, because like which is ingenious because more people are just like, oh, I want to see the real cover, so like
Mm-hmm.
more albums get purchased. And also like you know the stores only have to approve the cover artwork. They don't have to approve of the artwork inside of it.
Right.
So what difference does it make what you have on the inside? So like also very smart business decision.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just like I wanted to throw that out there too.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Deicide's whole thing has been, and Glenn Benton specifically, is using controversy to sell records, and I think they've done a good job of that.
I mean, controversy creates cash.
Yeah, it does.
That will never go out of style. I think it just gets harder. It gets harder to be controversial sometimes until you figure out what buttons you need to push and what buttons you want to be pushing.
Yeah.
And then I think you could still like you could figure it out. Even like I mean, in this era, everybody is like so many people are so goddamn sensitive that
Mm-hmm.
like it's pretty easy to like to do that. I mean, you're not necessarily gonna be able to do it with like Satanism, but like you could find a way to just like poke the bears.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting. I mean, he's kind of like mellowed out now because he's just like I'm 50, you know, I'm 50 something. I'm like north of 60. Like
Yeah.
like what kind of like gimmick am like what kind of like thing am I gonna do now? Like it doesn't like it just looks sad if you're like the 60 something year old like hardcore death metal guy. Like just at this point, like he's kind of just being himself, and people like that anyway.
Yeah.
It's like he's just like a biker guy.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of all that I've got on Deicide. They're one of my favorite bands. I go on a bender listening to them at least twice a year. They're one of my favorite bands to work out to
Yeah.
because like it just really like gets the adrenaline going. Um, and yeah, they're a lot of fun. Like they also like help. Like the music also has always been like a good stress reliever for me. For some reason,
Hmm.
like it's just always been there whenever I've been like whenever I've been like in like a weird place. For some reason, when I put on Deicide, it kind of helps me get out of that.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's this band specifically, but
Well,
I don't know. Maybe there's just like a nostalgia to it because like I really just enjoyed I enjoyed scaring people in high school who like were just like dicks to me.
yeah.
So that maybe that has something to do with it. Like, just being mischievous and just doing like awful things and um just like vandalizing school property. All in the name of just like getting back at the people who were like being like who were being like shitty to me. Um like revenge is a sweet dish.
Yeah.
Let me tell you. It's fun and you can be very creative with your vengeance. So, in the immortal words of Steven Tyler in in the iconic first person shooter Revolution USA, which we no Revolution X, which we've also discussed on a very
Hmm.
early episode of this podcast. Remember, music is a weapon.
Find our car and stop the new order.
Yeah, there you go. All right, but that's all that I've got to say about Deicide. Go listen to him, go have a fun time, and
And go check
just
out the Bob Larson, Glenn
yeah,
Benton
please check. If you have not,
antics.
if you've learned nothing else, please Google Glenn Benton, Bob Larson.
Yep.
You're in for a treat. Alrighty. So that's the end of that chapter. This has been Why Does This Exist? I've been Chris.
And I've been Rob.
And remember, question everything.
Good night, everybody.